All right, so get this. We're diving into this case today, and the biggest clue might just be a license plate.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, SLP 386S.
I don't think I recognize that one.
Yeah, probably not. But to investigators, it just screamed Susie Lamplugh.
The estate agent.
Exactly, who vanished back in 86.
Oh, right, yeah.
So that SLP and the year 86, just too eerie to ignore.
Yeah, that's a pretty crazy coincidence.
So we've got news articles and that Wikipedia entry on Susie.
We're laying out all the facts.
Yeah, all the twists, the dead ends, the whole thing.
But it's still unsolved, right?
Officially, yeah, even with a prime suspect.
I mean, how often does that even happen?
It's wild, right? So what are we hoping to uncover today? Well, you and I are going to try and put the pieces together.
Like, what actually happened?
Yeah, why this guy, John Cannan, is at the center of it all.
And why we still don't have answers after all these years.
It's crazy, right?
To really get this case, though, I think we need to understand John Cannan.
Like even before Susie Lamplugh disappeared.
Yeah, he wasn't just any criminal, he was a predator.
Yeah, meticulously planned out his attacks.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's rewind all the way back to the beginning.
July 28th, 1986.
Susie's 25, working as an estate agent in Fulham.
London.
Yeah, seemingly normal day until it absolutely wasn't.
So she had a house showing scheduled?
With a Mr. Kipper.
At 37 Shorrells Road.
And that little detail, right?
Yeah.
Noted in her diary would become one of the biggest mysteries of the case.
Oh, for sure.
Witnesses saw Susie at the property.
Even saw her walking away with a man.
Right. But here's where it gets a little strange. She left her handbag at the office.
Huh. If she was planning to meet someone, why not take it with her?
Yeah, it's not like she was just popping out for a quick coffee.
Exactly. It suggests she didn't think she'd be gone long.
Which makes it even more perplexing.
And then her car?
Yeah, the white Ford Fiesta.
Found abandoned about a mile away.
Driver's seat pushed back.
Like someone taller than Susie had been driving.
Her purse was inside, but no keys.
And no keys to 37 Shorrells Road either.
The house she was supposed to show.
So many missing pieces right from the start.
It's a puzzle for sure.
And a disturbing one.
So they looked at the people closest to her first.
Boyfriend.
And flatmate.
Dead end.
Yeah, classic case of the boyfriend and flatmate having solid alibis.
Backed up by witnesses, of course.
So the investigation had to widen its scope.
And quickly, I bet.
Yeah, the press went into overdrive.
Oh, I bet. Sensing a story that would captivate the nation.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, Mr. Kipper alone.
Come on, that's going to send imaginations running wild.
Oh, yeah, for sure. People thinking code name.
Criminal alias.
All of it.
And then you add in that detail about the red roses.
Delivered to her office.
Days before she vanished.
Like something out of a thriller novel.
Totally unsettling.
But it sounds like the police weren't exactly hitting home runs in those early days.
What do you mean?
Didn't they release a photo of Susie with the wrong hair color?
Oh, yeah, that's right. They circulated a picture of her with brown hair.
When she'd actually dyed it blonde.
Before she disappeared. Not exactly the smoothest start to the investigation.
And those early missteps had implications later on.
So in the middle of all this speculation,
Then missteps.
a name tops up that changes everything.
John Cannan.
And at first, he just resembles the police sketch of Mr. Kipper.
Right.
But there's a catch.
He's already in prison for rape.
So as investigators dig deeper into his past,
All those unsettling connections start emerging.
like the fact that he was released from prison just days before Susie vanished,
And that his preferred hunting ground was affluent areas like Fulham.
so he was basically back in his element.
Yeah.
But what really set off alarm bells for me was the detail about one of his ex-girlfriends.
What was that?
She told police that Cannan claimed Susie was buried at Norton Barracks.
Whoa, that's not just a coincidence.
That's a direct link.
Chilling.
It really is. And it put Cannan right at the front of the investigation.
That there was another case.
That would solidify his position as the prime suspect.
A tragically solved one.
The murder of Shirley Banks.
In 1987.
And guess who was convicted?
John Cannan.
And what was the license plate on the car he was using?
SLP 386S.
Those 3 letters and 2 numbers.
Became a focal point.
Could SLP really stand for Susie Lamplugh?
Was it a message?
A taunt?
It definitely added fuel to the fire.
Okay, so we've got 2 women, both targeted by the same man, and a license plate that seems to connect them.
But there's more, right?
Yeah. What about that statement Cannan made about a Bristol businessman?
Being responsible for multiple murders.
It's got to raise some eyebrows, right?
especially considering how he presented himself,
Like a successful businessman.
using that to charm and disarm his victims.
So that statement, plus all the mounting evidence, led to the Susie Lamplugh case being reopened.
In the early 2000s.
And this time they had a laser focus on Cannan.
What did they find during that second look?
Well, it sounds like they were finally starting to connect some dots.
Like what?
They uncovered this pattern of behavior.
Which they dubbed.
The house for sale rapist.
So he might have been using open houses to target women.
Potentially, yeah. And it's a tactic that could easily fly under the radar.
Totally. You wouldn't think twice about meeting an estate agent at a property for sale.
And it gets worse.
What?
Police discovered that just days before Susie vanished, Cannan visited a house for sale on Shorolds Road.
Believing the young woman inside was alone.
Yeah, but her husband unexpectedly appeared, and Cannan quickly left.
It's like a chilling dress rehearsal for what might have happened to Susie.
It's almost too scary to think about.
So they have this pattern, the timeline.
And then there's that DNA evidence found in Cannan's car.
But you said earlier it wasn't conclusive.
Yeah, why not? What were they missing?
Well, they found Susie's DNA in a Ford Sierra connected to Cannan.
Okay,
But they couldn't definitively prove she was in the car at the same time as him.
I see.
The technology back then just wasn't as advanced.
So they needed more than just her presence in the car.
They needed a direct link to him.
So another piece of the puzzle that fits but doesn't quite complete the picture.
Right.
But then they find something else in that car. Something that connected it to another potential victim.
Sandra Court.
Hairs found in the same car had DNA matching Sandra Court.
And her murder remains unsolved.
So now the scope of Cannan's potential crimes expands.
And the investigation takes an even darker turn,
Two unsolved cases potentially linked to the same man.
both with chilling similarities.
And we haven't even talked about that nickname Kipper.
That can't just be a coincidence, can it?
It's hard to believe it is, especially when you consider that Cannan was actually known as Kipper in prison
Why?
because of his fondness for a particular type of tie.
Mm-hmm.
Why would Susie use that specific nickname for her supposed client unless there was a connection she wasn't revealing?
So many threads pointing to Cannan,
But they're just out of reach.
not quite forming a complete picture.
And the more we learn about him, the less likely it seems that he'd ever confess.
Even if he was responsible.
So this is where analyzing his psychological profile becomes crucial,
Experts labeled him a psychopath,
highlighting his lack of remorse,
manipulative behavior,
persistent denials.
despite the mounting evidence against him.
Some even suggested that he might derive pleasure from toying with the authorities.
Holding on to those secrets as a form of control.
Incredibly frustrating, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that he might have the answers, but choosing to stay silent.
Totally.
But even with Cannan as the prime suspect, there's still that lingering question.
What if the Mr. Kipper meeting was a fabrication?
What if Susie was meeting someone else entirely?
It's a theory that can't be completely dismissed.
And it's one we'll explore further in the next part of our deep dive,
We'll look at the evidence for and against it.
and delve into why Susie's mother so vehemently opposed it.
Because even with a mountain of evidence pointing towards Cannan,
There are still shadows of doubt.
whispers of other possibilities.
And until Susie is found, those whispers will continue to echo through this case.
I can't wait to dive into that.
Me neither.
Welcome back. So before we went on that little mental journey to Norton Barracks, we were talking about the possibility that Susie fabricated the Mr. Kipper meeting.
Right? Like, what if it was all a cover-up?
Exactly. So if we entertain that theory for a moment, what evidence supports it and what contradicts it?
Well, the fact that she left her handbag behind could point to a planned meeting,
With someone she knew.
right? Maybe someone she didn't want her colleagues to know about. Like she was trying to keep it under wraps.
Makes you wonder.
But Susie's mother, Diana, was deeply involved in the case and insisted that going against work protocol was totally out of character for Susie.
Oh, that's a good point. She's meticulous about her appointments.
And her diary.
Hold on, though. There's that strange phone call from the Prince of Wales pub to consider.
You're talking about the Sarah call?
Yeah.
Right. A woman claiming to be Sarah left a message for Susie,
And then a man pretending to be a policeman called.
asking about Susie's diary and checkbook.
So suspicious.
It does sound that way.
Like someone was trying to figure out if Susie's diary was accurate.
Or if she had made alternative plans that day.
Do we know if the police ever traced those calls back to Cannan? That's a great question, and it really highlights the limitations of the investigation back then.
I mean, technology wasn't as advanced as it is now.
Tracing calls and tracking movements were much more difficult.
So we can't definitively say it was Cannan.
Right.
But let's get back to the house for sale rapist pattern.
Okay.
This seems like a really strong piece of the puzzle.
It does, and it aligns with Cannan's history of targeting women.
He was already convicted rapist, remember?
Right, and this pattern suggests a calculated approach.
A predatory approach.
Exactly. But the question is, does it definitively link him to Susie's disappearance?
I mean, he can't be ruled out, especially given the timeline and his presence in Fulham around that time.
That's true.
But is it possible that this pattern, as compelling as it is a red herring?
Could someone else have been using the same tactic?
Yeah.
It's possible, but statistically unlikely.
Okay.
The similarities between the unsolved cases and Cannan's known methods are striking.
And we can't forget about that incident where he visited a house for sale on Shorolds Road just days before Susie vanished.
Right. He thought the young woman inside was alone, but her husband was there, and Cannan left quickly.
It does make you wonder if he was scouting potential victims.
Looking for an opportunity.
Yeah.
It's one interpretation.
Right.
It could also suggest he was just looking for houses to burgle.
And his interest in women was purely opportunistic.
We have to be careful about assigning motives based solely on patterns.
That's a good point.
So,
What about the DNA evidence found in the Ford Sierra?
you mentioned earlier that it wasn't conclusive.
Right, but we can't ignore it either.
Absolutely not. The presence of Susie's DNA in a car linked to Cannan is significant.
For sure.
But as we discussed, the technology at the time couldn't determine if her DNA was deposited there at the same time as Cannan's.
Right.
It's frustrating. It leaves room for doubt.
So hypothetically, if this were happening today, what kind of evidence could definitively link them?
Oh, today. Investigators would have so many more forensic tools.
Like what?
They could analyze trace evidence like fibers or soil with much greater precision.
Oh, wow.
And they could use advanced DNA techniques to establish timelines and connections that were impossible back in the 1980s.
I see.
And of course, there is all the surveillance technology we have now.
CCTV footage,
Cell phone records.
GPS data.
All of that could provide crucial insights.
It makes you wonder if this case would have been solved quickly if it happened today.
It's certainly possible.
Yeah.
But even with all those advancements in forensic science, some cases remain unsolved.
Right.
There's always that human behavior element.
The unpredictable nature of criminals.
And the possibility that crucial evidence just doesn't exist.
Okay, so back to 1986.
We have the DNA link
The house for sale pattern.
and those unsettling phone calls.
But then the case takes an even darker turn.
With the discovery of Sandra Court's DNA in that same car.
Talk about a wrench in the works.
Now we have two unsolved cases,
2 missing women.
both potentially connected to John Cannan.
The stakes just got a lot higher.
It makes you wonder how many other victims there might be.
That's a chilling thought, especially considering how prolific Cannan seemed to be.
It is.
But what about those searches conducted over the years?
Norton Barrack.
His mother's former home.
Were those searches based on solid information, or were they just grasping at straws? The search at Norton Barracks was based on the statement from Cannan's former girlfriend.
The one who claimed he told her that Susie was buried there.
Right, it was a lead they couldn't ignore, but it turned up nothing.
And what about the search of his mother's former home?
That was based on information from a prison inmate?
Who claimed Cannan had confided in him about Susie's body being buried there.
Again, nothing.
It must be so difficult for Susie's family.
Not knowing what happened to her.
Not being able to lay her to rest.
I can't imagine.
Did they ever give up hope?
I can't speak for their personal feelings, but they never stopped searching for answers.
They channeled their grief and frustration into founding the Susie Lamplugh Trust.
Which has become a leading voice in personal safety awareness and education.
A remarkable legacy considering the circumstances.
It really is.
But it doesn't change the fact that John Cannan remained the prime suspect.
Right.
And his psychological profile suggests that he might never reveal what he knew.
That's the frustrating reality when dealing with someone like him.
He fit the profile of a psychopath. Charming, manipulative.
Devoid of empathy.
Experts believe he derived pleasure from the control he had over others.
Even from his prison cell.
So even if he did take those secrets to his grave,
It wouldn't be surprising.
not at all. But that doesn't mean we can't learn from this case.
What do you mean?
In fact, I'd argue that the lessons learned from Susie's disappearance are more relevant than ever.
Absolutely. We'll dive into those broader implications and the lasting impact of the Susie Lamplugh case in the final part of our deep dive.
So we've spent a lot of time going over the evidence, the theories, the frustration of not having those concrete answers.
And yet, even without a neat resolution, the Susie Lamplugh case really changed the conversation about personal safety, especially for women.
It's hard to imagine now, but in 1986, That awareness just wasn't there like it is today.
That's true. The dangers faced by women, especially those working alone, weren't widely acknowledged or discussed.
Not like they are now.
No.
And Susie's disappearance really forced society to confront those dangers.
Head on.
And her parents, through the Susie Lamplugh Trust, they really pushed for practical changes.
They weren't content with just raising awareness.
Right, they wanted to create a safer world for everyone.
They were instrumental in promoting personal safety training,
Advocating for stricter safety protocols.
particularly for lone workers.
Like estate agents.
Exactly.
So real-world changes in how estate agencies operate.
Like sharing schedules with colleagues,
Being more cautious about meeting strangers at properties.
things that are almost second nature now.
But back then, those were groundbreaking ideas.
Absolutely. And the trust's impact went way beyond the real estate industry.
Oh.
They pushed for risk assessments,
Lone worker policies
personal safety training.
across a wide range of professions
It's about empowering people to take control of their safety
to recognize those potential dangers.
and trust their instincts.
There's also that campaign they spearheaded for licensing private hire vehicles in London,
Right.
a direct response to the uncertainty surrounding Susie's disappearance.
And the possibility that she might have gotten into an unlicensed car?
It really highlights how one single case can just expose those vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. The trust recognized that the existing regulations weren't doing enough to protect passengers.
And they push for change.
Yeah, their efforts led to greater safety for everyone using private hire services.
Not just in London.
But across the country.
And then there's the Protection from Harassment Act of 1997,
Huge win.
giving victims of stalking legal recourse.
Finally acknowledging the psychological damage it inflicts.
A landmark moment, really.
Shifting the legal landscape.
Providing protection for those who had been previously ignored.
Or dismissed.
It's amazing what the trust has accomplished.
It is.
But beyond all the laws and the protocols, I think Susie's case really had a profound impact on just individual behavior.
In what way?
It made people, particularly women, more aware of their surroundings.
More cautious about meeting strangers.
It's like a collective shift in mindset
like a heightened sense of vigilance that people carry with them today.
because of cases like Susie's.
Exactly.
Being aware of your surroundings,
Trusting your gut instincts.
taking steps to minimize risk.
Even in ordinary situations.
It's sad that it takes a tragedy to spark that kind of change.
It is.
But it's also inspiring to see so much positive action come from such a dark case.
That's the thing about these deep dives. They're not always about finding the answers.
Right, it's about understanding the impact.
The ripples that spread outward.
Exactly.
All right.
And while the mysteries of Susie's disappearance might never be fully solved, her legacy lives on.
In the countless lives touched by the Susie Lamplugh Trust.
And in the increased awareness around personal safety.
It's a reminder that even in the face of tragedy, there's always potential for growth and progress.
So well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into such a complex and heartbreaking case.
Of course.
If you want to learn more about the Susie Lamplugh Trust and the incredible work that they do, please visit their website. Stay safe out there, and until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep